It's not necessary to believe in past lives to make use of the information in fingerprints, but one way or another, come up with any explanation you want. One way or another, there's a story already printed on your fingerprints 5 months before you're born.
Hello, and welcome to Holistic Ambition, where we talk with visionary leaders about creating a career, relationships, and life that is sustainable to your well-being, meaningful, and a lot of fun in the process. I'm your host, Stephanie Thoma, founder of Holistic Ambition, leadership coach, and author of Confident Introvert. Today, we have Richard Unger with us. He is the author of Life Prints and Hand Analysis 101, founder and director of International Institute of Hand Analysis. He founded that in 1985, when at that time, there was no other school for hand reading in the United States, so he decided to create one himself. And since then, during that time up until now, it's currently the year 2023, he's read over 60,000 pairs of hands. That includes over 120,000 individual hands. He's currently living in Sausalito, and I'm so excited to welcome Richard to the show. Welcome. How are you today?
I'm doing great. That includes your pair of hands.
It does. Yes, I remember. We connected. You did an event actually in my Noe Valley home in San Francisco because, you're just over the bridge. And I found the session to be really insightful. There were certain things I'm like, how did you know that? Just by looking, you knew things about the past and, some things that likely could become very much entrenched in the future. So, I'm curious about how you initially got into hand reading, especially. It sounds like a true calling because it's not something that was available in the US. So I'm curious if you traveled somewhere and became aware of this practice or how that became your calling.
Okay, let me just poke at you a little, Stephanie. So I don't talk to people about their future possibilities, not really. People hear that in what I tell them. I talk to people about their life purpose, what their life of deepest meaning could look like. And it would be good if they were living that at the exact same time that I'm reading their hands. I'm already there, they might tell me. And that's fine with me. That's a great reading. But only about 5% of the people I read for report that. And most of the people I read for can see what I'm talking about in terms of their possibilities, whether or not they will make a move in that direction. I cannot see that in a person's hands. I can report what your worst case scenario looks like. I can detail what your lousiest life would look like. And I can equally detail what your best life would look like. Whether you go there, move in that direction or not, I cannot tell. So I got interested in hands. I was traveling, but I was traveling in North America. And it was 1969, which is now a long time ago. And I was just out of basic training. And this was a difficult time for me. I didn't want to be in the military, blah, 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 blah. I'm not going to go into my own story in all that much detail. But I had a time off thing. I was given a time off and I decided to traipse around North America. And along with a pal of mine, we bought a junker car and which didn't make the entire trip, but it got us partway across North America. And on that trip, I met all sorts of interesting people, had different adventures. And in Boulder, Colorado, I picked up a palmistry book. I actually went into a bookstore at a local college because I wanted to learn more about the West. I was in the West. I had never been in the West, but I wanted to learn about, cowboys and Indians, sheriffs, outlaws, the mountains. I wanted to read about the West. And instead, I wound up buying a palmistry book for about $1. And within a day, I was completely hooked. I was meeting all sorts of people. I would take out my little 80-page guide, which wasn't all that good looking backwards, but at the time, it was something. And I looked at the book, I looked at me, I looked at the hand diagram, and as I met people and I started to talk to them with my little handy dandy guide, people got all interested in a way that was very compelling. The types of conversations they had with people was shifted by the fact that I was looking at their hand. They became much more real, deep, what my deepest aspirations are, what has really changed me in life, what has been my biggest thwarting that I've experienced. It was a much different type of conversation than, hello, how are you, and what do you do? It was a very deep connection very quickly. And what I found was I enjoyed that type of conversation I was having with people. And I enjoyed what came out of me when I looked in people's hands. As I looked backwards, there was an enhanced aliveness factor and a certain wisdom factor that emerged out of me in the act of reading hands and the act of having those conversations with people. And I liked that realm and I wanted back in. So when I went back to college, I just got every book out of every library I can find, which is not that many. Started to read hands in the snack bar. Got hired by the university to do like adult education classes in palmistry because it was a friend of mine who was the guy who hired people to do that. And my career was launched.
Wow. Okay. So, what I'm sensing is this, this almost serendipity, and, what a contrast to being in the service. I assume that's military service, and then sort of being really drawn by this one book that you find in Boulder, Colorado, that effectively transforms your life because you allowed it to, right?
Didn't know it at the time. My whole life changed on a dime, and I didn't know it at the time. I crossed the threshold, and it didn't seem to me that I had crossed anything. I stepped over an invisible line, but everything changed. It was 10 years later that I made the move to make it my full-time occupation. And I had a very different lifestyle. I was a businessman. I had a family of 5 that I was supporting. I was in the financial business. I had a suit and tie. I had a secretary. I had I was a business person. And I was doing this hand reading stuff on the side. And it was a hobby, but it was an all-consuming hobby. And I had to make sure when I left that if I was taking a briefcase with me, that I took the right briefcase. I had my business briefcase and my hand printing briefcase. So if I was going out to read somebody's hands, I wanted to have the right equipment with me. But eventually, this just took over, and rightly so. And I didn't realize at the time how young I was to be making such a move. I was 31. And again, I had a family of 5 to support. I had an income. And all of a sudden, I'm doing hand reading. My friend said, "That's great. You're living your dream." None of them were going to offer to pay my rent or anything like that. It was overwhelming. But since then, I've read who knows how many people's hands who are on the cusp of a life-altering decision. They're at a crossroads. And 31 is actually young. Everybody else looked like they were all set. They had their kids, they had their mortgage, they had their job, and things or they had their divorce, whatever. Things were set a certain way in life, and things weren't going to really change. I read for people at all ages who, again, are at a crossroads, who are looking for, what am I going to do with my life, and choosing to do something that brings the greatest sense of meaning and aliveness. It's never too late to do that. It's never too early. And the people who rearrange their life took a certain direction, and then they find out later that doesn't fit me. That's a direction that's okay, but it doesn't fit me. That's a big thing to shift. And most people don't even make that shift. 31 is actually early for that. I'm reading for people who are, let's say, 41, 51, et cetera. And I see, wow, I made that switch early on, even though at the time I thought, my God, it's so late. Everything should be set up already.
Yeah, there can be this sense of urgency, especially when there's this traditional sense of ambition that's been embodied and internalized. And, it really is taking a bet on yourself. And it sounds great that your friends were supportive, but of course, to your point, they're not so supportive that they're going to fund your venture.
They weren't supportive that way. Live your dream. That's great. Yeah, the juice from that ran out after a month or so.
Yeah. And I mean, also beyond, living your dream and really taking a risk that's rooted in what feels like it's your truth is, leading by example. And, I'm curious if you have seen or observed any trends when it comes to when the people you've read for typically begin to step into their purpose.
Okay. So I've seen a lot of trends over that. And my report might not be well, I wonder if what I say next is what you have heard from other people or expect to hear from me or not. People change, generally speaking, when the pain gets too great in staying where they are. And in general, bad pain is not enough to motivate people. It needs to get extreme. And people feel burned out. They feel like they're getting number and number, and their life is this what it's amounting to? And from my perspective, reaching a stage of desperation with that is an excellent sign, an absolutely excellent sign. I mean, I could have stayed in the financial realm. I was good at it. I liked it. My clients liked me. There was nothing wrong with it. It's societally acceptable. I did feel like I was helping people, but I'm so glad I didn't stay there. I mean, that was too much. I was living more like, my graph was like this. It was a straight line graph. Get up, get dressed, go to work, come home, kiss the wife, tuck the kids in, pet the dog, wake up, repeat. There was nothing wrong with it except everything, because it wasn't where I belonged. And I'm so glad I shifted this way. And I read for people who are like where I was just before I made that move in my life. I read for people at all different ages who are sitting at that point. Now, not everybody I read for comes in to see me because of that reason, but that's the main reason that I see people. I ask people at the beginning of any session, if there's an outcome they want, is there a particular reason they came in for their session? And that's the most common answer I get.
Yeah. And, what I'm seeing here is really heeding the call, and even going into your story, it wasn't overnight where you picked up the book, even though there was that shift and it was in motion. It took 10 years. So I'm curious,
10 years.
Do you believe, let's say that someone watching this right now, let's say that they have had a clear calling, maybe it was subtle, maybe it was like a brick hitting over the head type of moment, but they still kept, the safe job, or maybe the universe was kind of helping them out and, fire them from that job, but they still are trying to get back on that treadmill that is not their purpose. What would you recommend to someone in that situation? Someone who's kind of maybe not going with the flow of what could be meant for them, but is still trying to fit into an old paradigm.
So I'm going to answer in a way maybe a little different than expected. So what I've been doing for the last 4+ decades is talking to people about their life purpose, which I can see in their fingerprints. Their fingerprints have a printout as to what would bring the greatest sense of meaning in their life. There's a map in every person's fingerprints. And as you know, you cannot change your fingerprints. So that map stays with you your whole life. And there it is in case you forget what you came into this life to do. It's printed right there, except you need to be able to read it. So life purpose is not a particular arrangement of your circumstances. It's not a job that puts you on purpose. If your life purpose is the artist and you get yourself an easel and a smock and a bunch of paints and canvases, does that make you an artist? Maybe you're a hack. That just getting the title and the uniform doesn't make you an artist or anything else for that matter. So I say that life purpose is a daily practice of attention and intention. It's a daily practice, just like yoga is a practice. You don't get to yoga and then you're there. It's a daily practice. And it's a practice of attention first. You have to be able to hear that part of you talk to you. You have to respond. That's the intention part. You have to respond and take an action based upon being drawn to that which makes you more alive and gives you meaning. You've got a million little tiny micro choices. Each day, a few thousand little micro choices, what to pay attention to, what to pay attention to, how to follow your attention. And you can follow your attention towards that which brings you greater aliveness, or you can push it aside because you have important things to do over there, bills to pay, phone calls to return, blah, 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 blah. It's a matter of attention. So looking backwards, I couldn't get rid of the part of me that kept knocking on my door, tapping on my window, pay attention to me. I did pay attention to that guy. And as I paid attention, that part of me got bigger, more commanding of my attention until it interfered with the life I was trying to build. It just grabbed me over. But the moment that I grabbed over, and I have stories to tell about that, blah, 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 but that was a culmination of a million minor attention being paid. I did it. I made a micro choice to pay attention to this a few thousand times before I crossed that threshold. And all of a sudden it was a fait accompli. I had no choice. By the time I made my choice to hand in my resignation at my regular job and do this full time, that wasn't the big step. There were a million micro steps that brought me there. And the last one was just the inevitable last one.
And how lovely that you're able to really relate to the people that you read for, because, it's relatable, right? It's a part of the hero's journey. And even I'll bring in just a little bit of my experience of our session, where I remember you specifically told me the only career path that you will be happy with is as a transformational life coach. And at that time, I was very focused on career coaching. And that felt so edgy for me to focus on transformational life. Like, who am I to call myself that? And then I went in a direction of even going further in the business side of things, like doing business coaching. And, sometimes life gives you more and more opportunities and shuts more and more doors that aren't aligned for you to lead you back to that purpose. That is where you're meant to be, even if logically you try to talk yourself out of it, or you try to compromise, kind of how it can be expressed. So, another thing I want to touch on, because I'd love for you to share sort of the basis of palm reading, like where did palm reading come from? And I'm also interested in its relationship with past lives.
Okay. So hand reading's been around forever. And when I say forever, there are some writings ascribed to Aristotle. It's hard to prove whether or not that's literally true or not, but people say this writing came from Aristotle, who supposedly was a palmistry teacher 2,400 years ago, taught Alexander the Great. And palmistry was a part of any man of letters. There weren't women of letters, but any man of letters probably studied handwriting back then, where it was already said that too much has been lost to antiquity, will never be able to recover most of what this field of study has gotten to. This is what was being written 2,400 years ago, and there's very little extant writings beyond 2,400 years ago to refer back further. Nonetheless, it's been around for a long time. And depending upon the different culture that it's in and the zeitgeist of the different cultures, handwriting has been used in a variety of different ways. So in the United States, handwriting might have peaked, in a certain sense of peak. There were more books published about handwriting somewhere in the 1890s, turn of the 20th century. And at that time, the books focused on matching your temperament and character to a proper job. So a person with this hand shouldn't be an engineer. They should be in the arts. A person with this hand shouldn't be in the arts. They should be an engineer. And okay, that's not bad. And that would be very useful, especially since how many choices did you have as a male now? Female, forget it. But how many choices did you have as a male as to what job you were going to have? I mean, your parents decided that, and your circumstances, your freedom, your free choice in the matter was, a small percentile of people had choices. So that's a different era than we're living in now. More and more, we have freedom to choose, which means there's an onus on us to understand ourselves. So hand reading today is more about who am I and how would I find meaning in life. Also, fingerprints, as far as the Western world, wasn't discovered until the turn of the 20th century. Scotland Yard started using fingerprints in 1903. In the Eastern world, there were systems for fingerprint analysis going back who knows how long, but not in the Western world, and nothing printed for a Westerner to read about fingerprints until the early 1900s. So palmists disregarded fingerprints. Again, it wasn't on their radar. Radar wasn't on their radar. So fingerprints emerged into hand analysis. That's been my research. And I'm the one, I started my school based upon fingerprints are 1/3 of a handwriting. You can't understand the hand without it. The life purpose information is in there. So hand readers traditionally have looked at the lines and the hand shapes. I do that as well. That tells me temperament, character, areas of stress, coping mechanisms deployed, how well they might operate or not. That's all useful. And that's stuff that you can learn about yourself in a lot of different ways. There are tests to take, therapists to see, life coaches to go to, who can help you understand yourself better. But the fingerprint information is what I consider crucial, because that's been there before you were born. It's unalterable. And that's what I consider to be your soul psychology. It's a map of what exalted destiny is possible for you. Whether you step into that destiny or not, that's a different story. But as I was telling the person I read for yesterday, this is what, I'm up to the fingerprint section of the reading. This is what I would have told your mommy and daddy the day you were born. She can do this, and it would be a better life for her if she does. To get there, she has to deal with this. So that's going to be visible by the time she's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, when she's in second grade. You'll see that issue in her life, because she's going to have that issue in high school as an adult. That's her issue. It's in her fingerprints. It's not erasing. You can assist her by supporting her dealing with that issue, because that's the doorway into her life purpose. That's visible in a person's fingerprints. I find that absolutely fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. How could that be in your fingerprints? How could I tell you anything about your life story from your fingerprints? That's ridiculous. How could there be a story before you're even born? Isn't your life your own free choice? Well, yeah, kinda, sorta. It's a combination of your free choice plus some form of reason for being that you showed up here to do. That's somehow in there.
Yeah, and predeterminism, right? So there's that. Palm reading alludes itself to the concept of predeterminism being very real, fate and destiny being very real. And I'm curious about that.
It blended with free will. You have destiny and free will. Your free will allows you to pay attention, direct your attention. And you keep directing your attention towards what I'm calling your life purpose. And pretty soon, I say pretty soon, a matter of years, pretty soon, your life will match the picture that's in your fingerprints. And now you're living your life of deepest meaning. Which, by the way, doesn't necessarily mean life goes well. You can still get a flat tire. You could still get punched in the nose by a random person on the street. Anything can happen to anybody. But what we can do is choose to live our life of meaning.
Well,
We can do that.
I'm so curious now. Do you recall the youngest and the oldest age that you've read for, and maybe what the outcome or experience was for each?
Well, I've read people on their first day of life, so I haven't read anybody younger than that. Yes. Although, as I could tell you, had I an electromagnetic photograph of your developing fetal hand, which I've seen renditions of in medical textbooks, I could have told your mommy and daddy this, and that months before you were born. Again, I'm not saying what will happen. I'm just saying where your life of deepest meaning is and what issues you face uncovering. Yeah. And I've read people, I think the oldest person I've read is 97. My wife has read about half as many hands as I have, which is quite a bit. She's retired now from hand reading. And she read somebody 99 or 100. So she read for somebody slightly older than me. But from my perspective, anybody still breathing can make use of a hand reading, because everybody, I believe, would prefer to be living a life of meaning. And as a matter of fact, if you're 100 years old, it's time to get serious about finding your life of meaning. You've got X number of time units left. Better make them meaningful.
Yeah, and to that point, echoing that it's never too late, never too early. Everything happens in divine timing, like how I was informed about your work in passing. And then I'm like, okay, you live very nearby. Let's coordinate, an event. And then from there, I'm also curious how the relationship is between, let's say, the physical form, specifically palms, and if you believe there is a relationship with past lives, future lives, and all of that.
I didn't answer that half of your question.
It's okay. I brought it back.
Thank you. Good job. So in my own model of understanding, my philosophical model includes past lives. And I'm comfortable with that. And during a session with somebody, I'll have different impressions, different remembrances. All of a sudden, while I'm reading for somebody, a song appears, or a piece of a movie from who knows how long ago will pop into my brain and not go away. And I've learned to pay attention to those, and other pictures might pop into my mind that look like a story taking place in an historical context that's not current, whether that's a past life or not, or just something my imagination is playing with. Who can prove anything about that? But I've read for Mormons. I've read for born again Christian. I've read for people from every possible religious or a non-religious orientation. It's not necessary to believe in past lives to make use of the information in fingerprints, but one way or another, come up with any explanation you want. One way or another, there's a story already printed on your fingerprints 5 months before you're born. There's a good news story, bad news story printed on your fingerprints. So in my model, you're here, you have a karmic legacy, you've come here to do something. There's a particular reason for your arrival. Do what you came to do. But if a person has a different point of view philosophically, okay. So in a reading, I hear myself saying to people sometimes, if you had past lives, it would be this, because this is what I'm seeing in your hands now. And even people who don't believe in past lives sometimes tell me, or often tell me, well, I've had dreams just like what you said. And I go, okay, well, maybe it's just a dream story, a dreamscape. Maybe the fingerprints are merely the biological legacy of your ancestral line going back who knows how many generations. I don't actually know, and who can prove anything about that. But nonetheless, in my way of thinking, the fingerprints have a past life model. and they tell me what you're still working on that would be necessary for you to upgrade for your life of meaning to appear and for you to walk that path.
Have you ever read for anyone who is borderline enlightened and may not actually reincarnate back?
I have people tell me all the time that they want this to be their last lifetime. So blah, blah, blah. I've read for all sorts of super enlightened folk. Let me see here. No names, but I spent a great deal of my time about 30 years ago attending workshops for my own personal growth, and also to see what workshop leaders did that I would like and what I wouldn't like to model. And I wound up reading for a lot of those workshop leaders when they learned that I was a hand reader. Who wouldn't want to get their hands read? So what I learned was that they put on their pants one leg at a time, that expression. They had the same crazy, out of balance, blind spots as everybody else. And they had an exalted destiny possibility like everybody else. And nobody, it seems, in my personal experience, nobody is immune to being blinded by their life lessons such that they're not responding awakedly in now time. People go into their various programmed behaviors in response to their environment. And I'll put me in that category too, of course. I have a life lesson. I get triggered in. I'm more likely to notice when I'm triggered in. I'm more likely to use my rescue kit coping mechanisms to bring myself back to equilibrium than I was, let's say, 30 years ago. You know who Ram Dass is? You know, the author I'm talking about, different age group, you and me. Currently not on the planet, Mr. Ram Dass. Wrote a whole bunch of books, was a Harvard psychology professor working with Timothy Leary back in the 50s, using LSD with alcoholics, and is a famous author, well, not famous enough, apparently. A famous author.
Now that you mention it, I probably have heard in passing, but yeah, so, okay, psychedelics with alcoholics.
That was his original work that brought him national attention. But and his connection to Timothy Leary, who became famous for a lot of reasons. But near the end of his life, he said, after doing, and then he started to list Vipassana meditation, and he started to list all the different, the psychotherapy courses I took in college and the training I took to become, a PhD, blah 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 in psychology. After all the things I've done, I've still got the same menagerie of characters following me around that I always did. And it's just that they don't quite control the show as much as they used to. So, he says, those guys didn't leave. They're just in the back seat, not the front seat of his car now.
Yeah. So is that kind of...
I'm trying to answer your question. I don't know that anybody ever finishes up like this. In my experiences, we've all got our stuff, including the people who are doing best. By the way, I didn't read for, but I've looked at the Dalai Lama's hands. He's got beautiful hands, clear lines. He looks like an engineer who wants to change the world in a positive way. If I was reading from him, I'd probably think that he was inventing a way for the oil companies to completely revamp their missions. And yet, just like everybody else, he had issues to deal with that were visible in his hands, just like you and me.
And, before we begin to wrap up, I am curious, if there are any trends that you recall when it comes to being able to maybe determine through the palm if someone's a young soul, an older soul. It sounds like there isn't necessarily that clarity of, oh, well, this is your last incarnation on Earth necessarily. But
Well, I had people asking me back in the 70s where people were saying, here, I'm an old soul. Here, you want to look at my children? I was told that they were old souls, it's so 50 years ago, people were talking to me like that as well. And their kids' hands look like every other kid's pair of hands. No, I haven't found anything that way. What I can tell you, there are some patterns I've noticed over time. People recognize their own, let me see here. People recognize their own psychology more apparently than ever before. They're able to describe their reactions that are problematic for them. Things that have been difficult are less buried in understanding of what would be required for me to feel better. Seems to be spoken to me by other people in a clear way that resonates as real, much more so than earlier. And that doesn't mean that the person I'm talking to has been able to manifest that improvement or that change any easier. It's just that they're able to articulate it better. They understand it. They visited it. They're grappling in a more aware way, it seems, than years ago. And one of the things I like to say is the win is in the grapple itself. If you're grappling with that which is challenging for you, that's what a human can do, grapple away. And that seems to be clearer than ever before. I'm real pleased about that.
So, branching off of that sort of grappling, how do you define ambition?
Your how do I define ambition question. I like that. And, I read that question on your forum the other day. So, there's ambition in the standard way that people use it. I'm eager to get the corner office. That would be ambition. But as a life purpose coach, life purpose reader, I say that there's another level of ambition. There is an ego-based ambition, which I'm not defining as negative by calling it ego-based. I want to accomplish this. I want my next book finished. I have goals in mind that I want to achieve. But there is a more cosmic level ambition. There is a meaning in life ambition. There is, I'm doing what I can to be the person that I was meant to be. I'm living the life I came to live. I feel like I'm using my time well on the planet ambition. And that ambition is not measured in accomplishments. It's measured by being present in the right life movie and taking what comes, including your failures, as part of that road to be on. Because after all, no matter which road we're on, we're going to have victories and defeats. And I'd rather be on my life of meaning road and have my victories and defeats.
Mm. So
it's a life purpose. It's a more soul psychology ambition that I'm responding to your question of. And that ambition is what I hope to bring to clarified, in a clarified picture to my readees. This is what that ambition is. And a blend of your goal ambition and your more cosmic ambition, to me, is a fuller version of a person being ambitious.
And what a beautiful distinction to make from, and not that it's bad, but some people are led by the ego-based ambition, and you're calling for a more sort of cosmic.
A combination of the two.
Okay, so both. You're not disregarding anything. And, when it comes to, if you were to distill this into, let's say, a word, a phrase, a sentence, what does holistic ambition mean to you?
I was just talking about that. It combines them all. You're not ignoring your circumstances, because everybody has circumstances. You got to pay attention to them. You're not ignoring your ego-based I wants, because to me, that's part of the cosmic plan. Also, you have an ego that has I wants. You should have I wants. If that part of you was not talking to you, you'd be kind of, you'd be a blob. But there's another layer of yourself that is often ignored, and that's your more soul psychology self. So it's all three of those: your circumstances, your ego-based I want system, and your soul psychology I wants. And when those three line up, you're in much better shape. Life be good.
And okay, beautiful. So, how can people, let's say that someone watching this is really curious about getting their palm read, is really curious about reading your books. How can people stay connected with you and learn more about you?
So I use emails, and I've got a website. My email address is richard@lifeprints, Prints, richard@lifeprints.com. That's the name of my first book. Handanalysis.net is my website, which has hundreds of pages worth of stuff. It's an information loaded website. It's not like filled with flashing pictures, as I've been told that I should create. I don't want that. I want a place, a reference place. I want like a quiet library of hand analysis stuff where people can come in and wander a quiet library and go to the section of the library, sit down in a comfortable chair and read what they want to read. And so I invite the listeners to contact me directly. I love talking to people about hand analysis, and I do readings for people pretty much every day. And contact me by email or go to my website, peruse, and see if there's anything there that interests you.
Wonderful. Okay, so it sounds like people know where to go. Email, your website are the best ways to stay connected. So thank you so much for your time today, Richard Unger. And I would also like to thank everyone at home or wherever you are for tuning in and watching. Consider this your invitation to subscribe to be the very first to know of the next holistic ambition speaker in our series. Wishing you a wonderful day. Until next time.